Hello world. Alright, firstly I must apologise. I look a minger. I'm really tired today. For some reason I didn't sleep very well last night and essentially I'm knackered now. And so if I appear grumpy, I'm not really grumpy. I'm just tired, okay? But I'm back here and I'll try not to make a part 3 of this video, but this is a debunking hi-fi myths part 2, okay? Just because I want to try and make it clear that although I stand by everything I said about why, what the artist intended is very unlikely to be what any of us ever hear. Okay, that is absolutely true. Okay, that ain't gonna happen. What is it not? It's not gonna happen. Okay, also, what I want to try and make clear as well. I mentioned 2 loudspeaker companies yesterday, KEF and PMC. Okay, and I really want to make it doubly, triply and quadruply clear that there's absolutely nothing wrong with any of the products they make. Okay, I was using those 2 companies as examples of the kind of advertising which is not always very helpful. Okay, and so therefore I just it's basically the gloss and the advertising that I was just trying to debunk. Okay, yeah, the products are fabulous. Okay, and that will become abundantly clear as this video progresses. Okay, because what I thought I'd do today is have a wander back to Audio T. It's not very far. Okay, my summer holidays are coming to an end. Okay, and I'll be kind of stressed out most weekends now, trying to make sure that all my work's done for the following week and whatnot. So I just wanted to try and make sure that I've had quite a few good experiences in the last few days of the holiday. Okay, so yeah, I thought let's go back to Audio T. Okay, I didn't promise them that I was going to buy anything. Okay, but what I wanted to hear was the Apollo R on its own, the Apollo R with the DAC-R. I'll talk about what all these are in a minute. Okay, and the RX5 speakers. Okay, I made a video about the RX3 speakers a couple of weeks ago because of my new RS5 speakers that I've got here, but I just was curious. Okay, so I had a little poddle in there. Okay, and I took 3 CDs with me, and this is take 3 of this video. Okay, and in both other takes I've left the CDs in my bag, and I promised myself I would get the CDs out of my bag, and I haven't. So if you just forgive me for 1 second, I'm looking around to see where my bag actually is. I'll get the CDs out. Okay, beg your pardon and beg your pudding and all that. Okay, and I still haven't cleared up that mess on my table. One of these things I promise that I'll do and then don't. Okay, right, so here are the CDs I took with me. Okay, now the title of this video is "You Won't Be Able to Tell the Difference." Okay, this is another hi-fi myth that I want to debunk today. Squash it stone dead. Okay, you will be able to tell the difference between different components. Okay, and the reasons were really achingly, blindingly obvious. Okay, let's just take this humble thing here called the CD. Okay, when CD came out, in the early 80s, 1982, I think, was the first time that we'd sort of heard them. Okay, the first Philips CD player, I think, came out towards the end of 1982, and the first, or one of the first at any rate, CDs to be published was ABBA's The Visitors, and there was quite a big song and dance about CD's launch. Okay, but digital recording and digital reproduction were probably going on for 10 years old by the time that we actually got CD. Okay, and I think there are two kind of factors involved in that. Okay, and one of them was a technical one. Okay, Sony and Philips invented the CD, but they hadn't agreed on a standard for it by sort of the beginning of the 80s. Okay, and the other reason was kind of market driven, and that was essentially, when are we going to launch the CD? Okay, and it turned out that at the beginning of the 80s, the recording industry was in a bit of a slump. Okay, increasing oil prices, that sort of thing, meant that it was getting more costly to produce LPs. So therefore, the vinyl that people were using was not quite as good quality. Okay, and therefore, and the market was in a bit of a slump. In this country, we'd had riots and God knows what else at the beginning of the 80s. People just were not in a good way financially to buy music. Okay, and so the industry kind of took I suppose what could be surmised as a bit of a bully boy tactic, really. Okay, let's tell everybody that vinyl is going to be dead, in quotes, soon. And that if they actually wanted to, continue to hear their music, they'd better buy it on CD. Okay, and CD is perfect sound. You can spread jam on one of these things and still play it. You can get fingerprints all over it and still play it. It's a load of old rubbish. Okay, it was a complete myth. Okay, and to sort of kind of add to this kind of perfection, in quotes, and also this kind of can you tell the difference kind of thing, it's exactly the same as it was in the studio. It's going back to these ads, isn't it? You'll hear what the artist intended. What the artist heard in the studio is what you'll hear in your house. You won't. You really won't. Okay, especially if that studio was the Concert Gabot, or I don't know, a massive sort of Wembley Arena. It won't sound the same. Okay, all it'll be is a sort of pretty good impression of it sounding similar. Okay, and all for the kind of reasons that I said there. And to sort of compound this myth, on this disc, okay, there are basically lots of tiny little pits and troughs, okay, that basically, when a laser reads them, it turns them into noughts and ones, which is a binary code. Those noughts and ones basically then get turned into electrical pulses. Okay, and essentially the argument went, if it's just numbers coming off a disc, then whatever you put this disc into, it's going to be the same numbers, therefore you're going to hear exactly the same thing. Okay, now you don't need me to tell you why that's not true. Okay, you really don't, but just consider, okay, what this thing would sound like if put into a 20 or 30 pound CD radio cassette with speakers built in, or if you took this and put it into a cord blue CD transport costing tens of thousands of pounds, and then put into a digital to analog converter or a DAC or a DAC. The cord 64-bit, again, costing thousands of pounds. Put into Conrad Johnson preamplifiers, valve preamplifiers, and then into mono blocks, and then put into Wilson Benesch speakers, all of which will cost you probably the best part of £250,000. Is it going to sound the same? Are these noughts and ones going to sound the same? No, because there are ways and means of getting this information off this disc. Okay, and once the information is off this disc, there are ways and means of converting that into the electrical pulses that are fed to an amplifier. Okay, there are good amplifiers, there are bad amplifiers, then there are good speakers and there are bad speakers, then there are rooms that might be acoustically good, there might be rooms that are acoustically difficult. There will then be your ears, and each of us is different in terms of our hearing. Okay, I'm a wee bit older now, but my hearing when I was 12, I can tell you that I could hear higher notes, higher frequencies than I can hear now. Okay, so every single variable in the chain will make this thing sound different. Okay, it will never be as the artist intended, and to be quite honest, no one will ever really know what the artist intended, except perhaps, maybe the artists themselves, but to be honest, how many of them care less? Okay, yes, you might find, obviously that, serious artists do care less, but they've not got any control over it. Okay, because there are just so many hundreds of variables out there. Okay, 2 makes of digital to analog converters that basically turn these noughts and ones into electrical pulses will sound different. Okay, and by and large there are really only a few companies that make them, but even so, they will sound different, and if you put them with different electrical components, they will sound different. If you use, okay, let's get into this now, okay? All right, because I know these products, I will talk about them because I know them, okay? Not because I'm pushing them in any way onto anybody, but I'm, very familiar with Riga's CD and digital reproducing stuff. I've heard it all, okay, through various different sort of speaker systems. Okay, let's take their bread and butter CD player. It's a fantastic CD player. Okay, it's called the Apollo R, as you will probably know if you follow me. Okay, it's a brilliant CD player, and it conveys a heck of a lot of emotion in people's voices. It makes the whole of the sort of music making kind of process and the reproduction process a lot of fun. Okay, it will make you dance, it will make you boogie. People have said, particularly when Riga's first CD player came out, which was the Planet, that it was the most analog vinyl-like sounding CD player to date. Okay, and I don't actually disagree with any of that. Okay, and again, I had a Planet back in the day, and I know. Okay, so that Apollo R uses one digital to analog converter in it. It's a high quality digital to analog converter. Okay, the Apollo R has all its components sort of shrunk into a half-size case. Okay, therefore all the other electrical components and whatnot that are in it are not necessarily the same quality as in their higher end CD players, but nevertheless it makes a fantastic job of playing CDs. And to be fair, again, I actually think you'd have to spend quite a lot of money extra, probably at least twice the price extra, to sort of get any improvement on that Apollo R. Okay, it's very, very well respected and widely regarded. Okay, and you know, it's not the cheapest CD player out there, but you know, it is amongst the cheapest that you'll buy. Okay, uses one DAC. Okay, the DAC or DAC-R, DAC-R basically, is basically a sort of half size again box. Okay, but what that does, it just contains the digital to analog converters that turn the noughts and ones into electrical pulses. The idea being that you can connect up, for example, a laptop or another kind of audio computer streaming device. I don't understand computer streaming devices, so I'm sounding a little bit vague here. But let's for simplicity's sake, let's say a computer. Okay, you can connect up a computer to the DAC-R via its digital outputs. Okay, and you can basically bypass the very cheap, and it has to be said, nasty sounding digital to analog converter inside a computer, because basically those are built down to a price. Okay, and have higher quality computer audio replay. Okay, I would find it very useful for a number of reasons, basically because I've got thousands of downloads. I don't have a telly, so all my telly is basically streamed and put through my hi-fi, and up until now it's been analog via just the headphone out socket into an analog input on my amplifier. It still sounds quite good, but you're hearing the iMax digital to analog converter. It's not the same. Okay, and we'll come on to one of the principal reasons why in a second. It's not the same as CD. Okay, CD quality is still actually very good, even though they didn't agree on the highest standards of CD replay back in the 80s, because we were on quite high, they could record to 20-bit digital by the early 80s, but because it was cheap, it was quick to get out, let's just, boom, 16-bit 44, boom, done, Sony and Philips, sorted. Okay, but nowadays, computers can stream much higher resolution files. Okay, and there are new downloading kind of services, and I'm not talking about Spotify, but similar sort of things to Spotify. But whereas Spotify kind of give you sort of compressed downloads of the sort of the MP3 style kind of thing, and iTunes downloads and Apple Music downloads now as well, basically also give you compressed what are called AAC files. Nowadays, you can actually get very high resolution files, 24-bit files and stuff. I think there's a company called Tidal which are starting a new download service, and they're offering full CD quality, and there are more kind of specialized web services that are offering higher quality than that. Okay, 24-bit files. Okay, so yeah, from that point of view, having a DAC would improve things, or a DAC-R, as Riga's thing is called. That would improve things, and also for my own music making purposes as well. All of the sounds that I use to record on are basically stored inside my iMac. Okay, and up until now, they have been processed by the iMac's own cheap DAC. Okay, and being able to put those through a DAC would also kind of improve those. Okay, and it does. Okay. not only can you stream and put computer music through a DAC, you can also connect up. Oh god, I am going on, aren't I? What am I doing here? Putting my password in. Sorry, everything's gone dark on my screen. Okay, sorry. But not only can you put computer music through a DAC, but you can also, via an ordinary CD player's optical out sockets, you can also plug that into a DAC as well, okay? And you swap between your various different sources, okay? Let's pretend it's a computer and a CD player, okay? And basically, that means that the CD player itself, you're only using the transport, okay? The transport is essentially the bit that takes the disc and reads what's on it, spins it round, controls, you know, whether or not you're skipping forward or skipping backward, and basically takes the sort of pits and troughs and whatever that are on here, and sends it to the digital to analog converters, okay? Well, the digital to analog converters in the DAC-R, there are actually two of them, okay? The Apollo R has one, as you'll recall, if you were awake 5 minutes ago. All right. The DAC-R has two, okay? The Saturn-R also has two digital to analog converters, okay? What are the advantages of that, people? Well, again, you know, it doesn't really take a lot of hard sort of thinking to just think, well, you know, just let's have an analogy, because I love them. You've got off the train, okay? You've got two heavy suitcases, okay? One in your left hand and one in your right hand, okay? Right, let's get as basic as we possibly can, okay? Now, your friend that's come to meet you off the train says, I will take one of these suitcases. I'm really tired. I'm really tired. Okay. I will take one of these suitcases off your hands and you don't need to worry about it. Okay. So what does it do? It makes the whole job a lot easier. It makes the whole job done a lot quicker. You feel less exhausted and less strained. Okay. Now, the Apollo R on its own, being put through sensible like for like in terms of price ancillaries that preferably you've heard before, so that you know, yeah, I'm happy with that sound, it sounds fine, before you buy it, okay? Sounds absolutely excellent, okay? If, however, you do as I've done, okay, and have upgraded various different bits and the CD player has kind of been left behind, you will start seeing that there are signs of some sort of strain going on, okay? And that kind of translates itself, you know, for the most part, it's very, very benign, doesn't do anything, except that I've got some pretty badly mastered CDs, okay, as most of us have, because just about anything beyond about the year 1998, okay, I'm talking about, you know, sort of anything post Red Hot Chili Peppers and Californication, okay, CD mastering is just getting worse and worse, okay, it really has to be said, okay, and, you know, it's, you know, nowadays they've kind of taken a little bit of lip service to the fact that people don't like the loudness war, okay, talked about that before, okay, but there are certain discs, and this is one of them. This is a brilliant album, Brett Dennen, Smoke and Mirrors. If you like sort of acousticy kind of folk music and, you know, sort of AOR folky rock ballads, okay, think of, oh, I don't know, no, I'm not going to give you a comparison, but basically, you know, this album is a brilliant album, Smoke and Mirrors by Brett Dennen. It's lovely, okay? In fact, just about anything by Brett Dennen is fabulous and lovely, okay? But this one in particular has been recorded with a certain amount of over-emphasis in the bass regions, okay? Simply because, again, this myth, hi-fi is bassy, okay? So, obviously, if you've got a computer and you put this thing into a computer and you listen to it through its computer outs, or maybe through an iPad or something like that, then you're not going to get much bass, okay? So it's essentially overemphasizing that bass, making it just a bit louder in order for it to sort of sound a bit more bassy on very, very cheap systems, okay? It doesn't translate very well into kind of hi-fi separates, okay? It really doesn't, okay? The bass sounds unintegrated, out of control, okay? And with the Riga Apollo R's very, very slight sort of looseness in the bass, okay, and very, very slight hardness in the mid-range, masters like this just make it worse, okay? So this is Brett Dillon's Smoke and Mirrors. This here, this is the free CD that I got with my Semi-Precious Weapons Aviation LP, okay? Aviation, here it is. It's a brilliant LP, go the right way up. It's a brilliant LP. Again, you know, I'm not saying that the music on here is rubbish. It's not the music, it's actually the way it's been mastered, okay? The vinyl is very, very bassy and has a very, very sort of restrained, over-restrained treble, okay? This has just incredibly boomy bass and incredibly splashy treble, okay? Playing it on the Apollo R basically exacerbates that, okay? Just makes it slightly uncomfortable to listen to, okay? So that is where, you know, kind of the strain in the Apollo R's single digital analog converter is kind of showing, okay? However, take this album here and put it into an Apollo R with a DAC-R, kind of starts controlling it, okay? The same with this one, okay? This one, although it's loudness ward, it's nowhere near as sort of uncomfortable to listen to as this. This is just really bad, okay? And this, although it's fantastic music, is probably the worst mastered vinyl album that I've got, okay? And I've got quite a few poor ones, okay? But that one, you know, it just takes the Huntley and Palmers, really. You know, despite having a clean, despite being played on fantastic equipment, it just doesn't sound any better, okay? What I did today then, okay, going into Audio T, I asked to hear the RX5 speakers just because really I was curious about them. They're roughly about the same size as my RS5s, which are slightly older, okay, in Riga's older range. And I asked to hear the RX5s, okay, just because I was curious, hadn't heard them kind of thing. Okay, so what we did was we sort of tried these albums with and without. So in the Apollo, with the same amplifier that I've got as well, the LXR, with just the Apollo on its own and with the DAC, okay, I took this album here as kind of my reference, okay, and this is what I started with. This is Nick Drake's Brighter Later, okay. I've had this album longer than I've had Hi-Fi Separates, okay. So I know it, okay, and I know that the bass on here, yes, you know, it's not a tinny album in any shape or form or whatever, but in terms of actual instruments that play bass, such as drum kits that have, you know, heavy kicks and bass guitars or string basses, they've all been kept very, very low in the mix, okay. And And so I took this as a reference, because basically if an Apollo R was going to make this sound bassier, then, you know, did I really... So if an Apollo R with a DAC-R on it was going to make this sound bassier, do I really want the DAC-R? No, I don't. Okay, so, you know, it was basically my control, my reference. Okay, the song that I used to sort of start my listening off on here was track 3, which is At the Chime of a City Clock. Okay, because it's quite sort of, it's got quite a dark overall sound to it. It's not an overly trebly thing. Okay, and sort of about sort of a third of the way through, you get this absolutely gorgeous saxophone, which I would never tire of hearing. It's just absolutely wonderful, 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 wonderful. Okay, now through the RX5s then, I got a closer sound, okay, because the RS5s that I have and the old R3s that I had, the sound stage is sort of behind the speakers, okay. It draws you in, it invites you to listen to it, okay. The RX5s are slightly bigger than I'm used to, okay, and they have a slightly more forward balance to them, okay, so that all of those images, those stereo images, which I love and which I go on about all the time, okay, far more touchable, far more, you know, wonderful to listen to, okay, and yeah, everything was on a much larger scale, okay. When the saxophone came on with the Apollo R, okay, it was breathtaking, okay, slightly thin sounding through the Apollo R for reasons that I've spoken about, okay. Bass not overly emphasised, but just everything was a bit bigger than I'd heard it before, basically because I was listening through larger speakers, okay. Absolutely gorgeous, absolutely stunning, okay. Switching in the DAC-R added a little bit of extra weight to that saxophone, so there's more texture there, more texture in his voice, and more control in the bass, okay. Not that this bass would ever go out of control anyway, because there's just, you know, very, very little to speak of, but, you know, just a much more full-bodied sound, much more cohesive, much more civilized, and the imaging was even better with that, with the DAC-R switched in, okay. Going to Smoke and Mirrors, okay, I took the title track from this, okay. As I said, this is a Loudness Ward album, okay. It's got, you know, for a gentle, beautiful ballad like Smoke and Mirrors, those kick drums really possess some heft, okay. I don't necessarily think it's entirely appropriate, okay. And through the Apollo R on its own, what sort of comes through basically really loud and clearly, especially when we get to the chorus, is this kind of muddle of a sound, okay. I'm using the word muddle in a relative sense, okay. It isn't a tinny little radio cassette, okay. So, you know, in terms of, you know, these RX5s are nearly 4 times the price of the Apollo R on its own, okay. So it will show up any kind of shortcomings in the sound, okay, and relatively very muddled chorus there, you know, down to the mastering as much as anything else, but yeah, you know, and the bass, and you could actually kind of feel it, okay. With the Apollo R switched in, just tidied it up a little bit, okay, made everything just, you know, a little bit more differentiated, sorts out, you know, the layers in the music, controls it, makes it a little bit more civilized, okay. And yeah, you know, very, very nice, much more engaging, okay. With this, okay, I chose track 4 on here, which is called Never Going Home Tonight, okay. Again, sort of a bit of a kind of synth ballad and everything. It's covered in reverb, okay. This is you know, down to, you know, a recording decision and whatever. And it's a lovely sound, okay, or it has the potential to be a lovely sound, put it that way, if they'd mastered it properly. But, you know, it's lots of little effects coming in and out, little synthy effects and stereo effects. In fact, this whole album, okay, has the potential. You know, there have been times, even when I've played the vinyl version on my P5, you know, I've closed my eyes before and almost experienced surround sound with the stereo, okay. Yeah, it still sounded like a brash, out of control recording via the DAC-R and the Apollo, but it did tighten it up a little bit. You were able to kind of sort of, the reverb kind of creates a bit of a splashy fog, okay, and you're able to see into it a little bit more, and kind of, you know, sort it a bit more, okay, and made for a far more civilized sound, okay. So that is kind of the effect of the of those RX5 speakers. More forward than my R3s, slightly more forward than my RS5s. Stereo imaging extremely good. Just, you know, lovely, lovely, lovely speakers. Okay, so I was having a conversation with the guy in Audio T. A bit of a chat with him about, you know, this, that and the next thing, and, you know, the differences I'd noticed in my own setup and everything else, whatever. Okay, and I said to him, I said I promised I would hear those PMC speakers. And I promised myself, you know, and, you know, so, you know, by all means, kind of thing, you know, anytime, you know, sort of thing. You know what, you know, there's no one in the shop now. Can we put them on now? Yes, we can. What would you like to hear? The 2023s. I'm not entirely sort of familiar with their kind of thing. You know, that's their sort of small floor stander. Okay, now their small floor stander, the 2023. Okay, it's smaller than the RS5s. It's about the same size really as my R3s or the RS3s that kind of replace those. And it's £1,000 more expensive, and, you know, there's absolutely no way, you know, that I'm going to be able to afford to buy these things. But we went back to Nick Drake, okay, just because, you know, gorgeous, lovely, 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 lovely. And so we put Poor Boy on. Put Poor Boy, first of all, on the RX5s, okay. It took you inside a jazzy bar with a piano, with definite attack on the piano keys, okay. It's quite clear that piano has been very close mic'd, because you could actually, as the piano is playing, particularly in the piano solo, you could see the keys, you could almost see his fingers playing the notes, you could hear the definite kind of strike of the hammer on the strings as it's playing. Okay, so that, you know, notes had a nice sort of leading edge to them. Okay, and, you know, in terms of the amount of reverb, those RX5s are far more revealing in the top end than, you know, some of the lower end kind of Rigas that I've heard. The RS5s don't do a bad job of revealing reverb. Okay, but the RX5s, you know, up again, okay, and it's all that reverb that gives you this illusion of space. Okay, I can imagine playing the Freewheeling Bob Dylan via vinyl on those RX5s. It must just be an amazing kind of experience to have. But yeah, so, you know, back to this thing, you know, you've got this room, you're inside this jazz bar, okay, you're almost on stage with the band. Okay, at least, you know, you're definitely in that front seat. Okay, when the backing vocalists came on, you could almost imagine them wiggling and boogieing, because Poor Boy by Nick Drake standards is actually quite a lively track. Okay, Nick Drake was a very introverted character who made a lot of his music with his face against the wall, and with his all of the staff and everything being told to leave basically while he performed, because he was that nervous and that shy. You can hear it in his voice. You can hear those nerves in the shakiness of his voice. And so with this sort of semi-upbeat track, Poor Boy, which is very jazzy, you've got these backing singers there, and you could almost imagine them sort of moving around to the beat, sharing a microphone as they face to face there, standing on the right. Okay, guitarist on the left, and this guitarist will be Nick Drake, basically, and all those sort of little twiddles that make a guitar kind of thing, all absolutely abundantly clear in very stark relief. The plectrum on the strings, plucking those strings, just amazing, absolutely amazing. And I thought, well, what could be better than this? Remember, we're still on the RX5s, okay? The RX5s, although they're expensive, they're still not as expensive as the PMC 2023s, okay, which are PMC's budget floor standard, okay, over £2,000 worth of speaker. In they come, smaller than the RX5s, and you think, what are they going to do? I was quite excited, really. Put it on again. Okay, and what landed in front of you? This was the first thing, and I nearly fell backwards off the settee in amazement, because what actually came into the soundstage was a grand piano, the actual wooden frame of a piano, probably a baby grand, but there it was. Okay, plonked centre stage, or sort of somewhere sort of in the centre of the stage. Okay. And again, you still had this physicality, but there was this, it's hard to describe, because you don't want to say that the RX5 is an uncivilized speaker, because it isn't. Okay, what it's doing is, giving you a very kind of upfront and up close kind of experience. What the PMC speaker is doing is controlling it a little bit more, okay? Still that wonderful physicality, okay? But you got more of a sense of the fact that Nick Drake was terrified, okay? You could hear it in his voice, okay? And, that is, it's those little subtleties which, with every single sort of step and upgrade, you start to hear those sorts of little things, the tone in the voices. I spoke about, on my Broken or Beyond Skin CD, my Knitting Sawney thing, how, the nuances in the voices, particularly sort of speaker voice, sort of announcer voices, in those songs, and how you can hear all the little inflections. And there they were, coming across with Nick Drake, still a full-bodied Nick Drake, but just kind of taken back just a smidge, but absolutely physical and absolutely there in the room. And at the moment, 10 years time, I might be able to afford those, when I do my next major sort of audit of my hi-fi, or I might be on the street destitute or something. But hopefully, one day I'll be able to aspire to something like that. Okay, they are just amazing. They are the I'm not going to say perfect partner because it's a preference. It's how you want your music, okay? But they make... Sorry, I'm back in darkness again. Come on, dear. Not really sure what's going on here. It's basically my screensaver. Okay, put my password in. Okay, I'm going to wrap this video up very soon because it's been going on 45 minutes. Blimey, and this is take 3. Yeah, it's a personal preference at the end of the day. But those PMC 2023s for Riga's mid-range gear just sound amazing. Okay, they really do. Okay, and for me it was just perfect because it had the best attributes of the R3s, which I lived with for 10 years and loved them. And I do hope their new owner, they're gone now, but I do hope that their new owner loves them as much as I did, because they were really wonderful, but just with a lot more physicality, a lot more control, a lot more space, a lot more, the solidness of imagery there. I spoke about, not just the keys of the piano and not just the fingers of the pianist, but the piano itself being there. And it was just amazing. It was just amazing. And yes, I would love to do that. I did joke with the salesman in Audio T that, perhaps if I sold my body just once, but I'm just perhaps a little bit too old for that, a bit too old and ugly for that, but there we go. And and again, do not have me down as an ungrateful old son of a what's it, because the RS5s are fantastic. They do an amazing job. Okay, I was very, very lucky to find them at such an absolute steal of a price. Okay, but in their full price guise, they are round about the same price, a little bit cheaper than the RX3s. Okay, and they do a fantastic job of making music. Okay, and I will be very happy with those for years and years to come. Okay, but I do know that debunking this myth, you won't hear the difference. Yes, you will. There was every difference between the presentation of all of those Riga speakers that I've heard very recently, within sort of weeks of each other, and again, another completely sort of different ideological shift and design shift, which makes those PMCs sound different. Okay, and you could wander up the PMC range as well. Okay, and still hear differences. And without sort of wanting to go on for too long, in my sort of Hi-Fi 101 series, one of the things that I talked about was allocation of budget. Okay, and again, what I kind of outlined there is kind of true. Okay, if you don't have much money to spend and you want to buy a full system, as it were, then half your budget on the source, possibly a quarter, maybe a little bit more on an amplifier and cheaper speakers. Each thing can be kind of upgraded as and when you kind of know why you want to upgrade. Don't just upgrade for the sake of it. I know I do that sometimes. Basically, my desires sometimes rule my brain. Okay, but I'm trying to make sure that there is at least a good reason why there needs to be some sort of upgrade in my system. Okay, but know why. Okay, but I think with CD, because within reason, and I am talking about proper hi-fi makes, as opposed to Jack Bloggs, who's got a black box that's very similar to last year's black box, but just got a few more initials on it and a few more buttons on it, okay, that might as well be a box of apples. But, you know, sticking within reason, okay, within a ballpark, as it were, you can't really buy a bad CD player. Yes, you can buy different sounding ones, okay, they all have a slightly sort of, you know, subtle differences in how they make music, okay, but once you've settled on one that you're happy with, they will withstand. As I've said, it's taken speakers going on for twice the price of the Apollo R, an amplification that's more expensive than the Apollo R as well, to kind of reveal those weaknesses. Okay, when we put those RX5s with the Apollo R on its own, then, you know, we knew that's the Apollo R and the master, obviously, of, you know, the mastering of the CDs. But we knew, you know, that's the thing that's responsible. Okay, that's why it's doing it. Okay, so you can kind of keep your CD player and upgrade the rest of it. Okay, you know, in particular the speakers, because, you know, they are the things you hear. Okay, so if you were talking about an analog source, you know, obviously a record player, for example, what I've said still stands true. Okay, that, you know, that really it needs to be the priority in your kind of music making system. Okay, if it was a computer, again, you know, I think the only thing that you can do in terms of, you know, upgrading a computer is, as I say, to, you know, try and find high resolution files of the music you like. But don't become a nerd. I know I'm a nerd, but I'm not so much of a nerd as to say, well, actually, you know, I might like ABBA, whose recordings can be slightly variable. I might like, you know, Semi-Precious Weapons, but actually I'm not going to play Semi-Precious Weapons on my hi-fi, because actually, you know, there are perfectly good companies like Name and Lin that take artists that no one's ever heard of and produce sterile laboratory style music that is just basically been recorded to show off the sort of hoops that hi-fi can jump through, and it's basically a boring experience. Okay, get hi-fi that sounds good with the music that you like. Okay, it can be done for surprisingly little, and then, you know, as and when you feel the urge, and, you know, if money ever becomes available or whatever, then you can kind of upgrade. Okay, but do it intelligently. Okay, and you know, with some sort of reasoning and logic behind it. Okay, and that's about an hour's worth of me ranting now. And yeah, as I say, that's going to be kind of like the last hi-fi debunking myth video that I'm going to make. Okay, you can tell the difference between different components. Anybody can. You might not necessarily be able to describe them. You might not know what the so-called trained listeners sort of what they mean. Okay, but you'll be able to tell the difference, and you will know what you like. Okay, and if you get the lot home and you think, turn it down a bit, turn it down a bit, turn it down a bit, then something ain't right. Okay, all right, there we go. Okay, have a lovely hi-fi experience, people. Bye.